there's usually some sort of a desire to have a high kind of quality threshold. But what we see that's really interesting is that to be able to do it and do it at scale, you have to have an ROI, if you will. Like, what is the cost of failure? And is that worth the investment in basically training your model to the level of kind of accuracy and completeness? I know it's kind of getting a little bit into sort of the nerdy part of things, but that's really what we see being a pretty interesting question is, well, how much is good enough? It's like, well, how bad is it if it fails? Is it going to cost you, money? Are you going to have lower revenues? Is it a safety application? If it's a safety application, people care deeply.
What does it really take to get AI into production and keep it there? Today's guest, Wendy Gonzalez, is the CEO of Sama, a company trusted by more than a quarter of the Fortune 50 to deliver the data and human-in-the-loop systems behind production-grade AI. With over 20 years of experience scaling technology organizations and a mission-driven approach to ethical AI, Wendy brings a rare perspective on how high-performance teams, high-quality data, and social impact come together in the real world. Wendy, thank you so much for joining us on Innovators Inside.
Thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Welcome. We are really excited. Can't wait to dive in with you. Lane, what do we got to start?
Yeah, so I want to start off with something that's just a little bit more kind of like work-oriented in like the sort of like value sector. What is the most surprising piece of advice you've ever received? And Wendy, I'd like to start with you. This stumped me. I thought about this for about 10 minutes before we hopped on here.
The most surprising piece of advice, I think, surprising. I'll go with surprising, was when I first became CEO. So there's always a first. I was like, okay, I've had a little bit of doubt. I'm like, I don't really know what I'm doing. I better start talking to people. I better start figuring out what this whole gig is about. So I probably had 30 different conversations with CEOs. I'm just like, hey, help me understand. How do you manage your board? How do you do this? How do you do that? Give me some advice. And one of the most surprising pieces of advice was from, a multi-time CEO that said, what I do every year is I fire myself. And I was like, what do you mean fire yourself? So, well, I think about what the company needs in a CEO the next year. I fire myself mentally. I pull up a list of what do I think the company really needs as a CEO, and I set my objectives and I sort of measure both my performance, what I need to do, how I need to show up on that benchmark. And I thought it was pretty amazing advice to not just think about, okay, I've gotten here, I've earned it, this is what the company needs, is to really take a step back and say, all right, where's the company going? What does the company really need? How can I measure up? How can I, supplement my gaps, things of that nature? Yeah, it was interesting.
I
love that. Yeah.
Although Lane, you're not allowed to look at me and be like, Ian, time for you to fire yourself.
Well, no, no, I was actually thinking, I was like, man, I should start firing myself too. So I don't know. That's very profound. I love that.
Well, and it's interesting in a changing world. Like it's funny. Like you got the annual cycle, right? And yes, you got fiscal year cycles, and we all work on years and all of that. But like, it's really interesting to think about what feels like in a world where the change around you in a year feels like it's accelerating and more every year. Like it's almost more important to take that moment and take stock of the changing context.
Well, and I think too, it takes a lot of humility as a CEO to be able to do that. And I think humility as a leadership quality is incredibly important.
That's good advice.
Yeah, because it's not about you. It's about what the company needs. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, I sort of liken it to budgets. There's a point in time where, you run a budget and everybody looks at, well, this is what you spent last year. So this is what you this year. And it's like, you're asking the wrong question, right? Yeah. It's like, don't just take and repeat, rinse and repeat, take a look at what has changed. And that goes beyond just strategy, goes to competencies, right? And skills.
Yeah. I've got some finance managers from early in my career I'd like you to talk to.
Yeah, or like the days of like, oh, like if we come in under budget, then our budget gets slashed next year. So we got to try to figure out how we're going to spend the money, and it's, you know,
Yeah.
yeah.
All right, Lane, you said you thought about this for 10 minutes. You need to
Mm-hmm.
answer this question.
Oh,
What's the most
oh, I
surprising advice you ever got?
so I think that stepping into a management position for the first time, I had kind of this notion that I needed to understand how to do every job, and
Mm.
that I had to know best practice for it. And so I think like the most surprising advice was actually it came from you, Ian, where I was
Oh,
yeah, but it basically it was like, I would hope that the next person that you interview teaches you something that you don't know. And I think it comes back to that humility where it's like, yes, I think like management isn't about knowing everything. It's about knowing what you don't know and finding the right folks to help fill in those gaps and supplement that. And a willingness to learn from the people around you. And, and I've always believed that you're never done learning and that life is a growing process. And I hope I'm not the same person next year that I am this year and things like that. But I think just the way that it was framed, it was like, oh, that makes sense. So, yeah.
I love. Well, I'm glad, but okay. So you guys. I'm so sorry for this. I'm gonna do like the most artificial segue, but it's so good, right? Because you know, aren't we in a world where all of a sudden the tools that we use can hypothetically teach us things or collaborate with us, and doesn't that sort of change the nature of our relationship with these tools, the AI
Ah,
systems, et cetera? So let's build on that thread later. I want to pull that.
yeah. Well, let's build on that thread right now.
That thread right now. Well, I mean, aren't we in the world?
Yeah.
Okay, so Wendy, like, I I want to pull on that thread, but I want to do it. I want to start with an introduction for you. I want to start with like, how did you come to be sitting on Innovators Inside? Tell us about your background, what brought you to build Sama, what you've learned along the way. Like, why are you here to talk with us about the changes that AI is bringing to the world and how we deal with it?
Oh, so, well, if I go all the way back, am a reformed accountant. So I actually went to started in auditing, realized I absolutely despised it, and leaned on my information systems part of my degree to
Mm.
focus on technology. So I did consulting for over a decade, working with large companies, figuring out how to leverage technology to kind of transform businesses. Um, I just sort of realized I wanted to own the technology. So I went to some public companies, took technology leadership roles, and I was like, well, that's not enough. I want to build a company. So then I went into startups. I co-founded a SaaS startup. All of this was really pretty great, kind of leveraging technology, and all in my entire career, it's been primarily driven by data. So how do you leverage data to make intelligent systems? It was big
Yeah.
data. It was Internet of Things. How do you leverage telemetry data, et cetera? And then, one day as we were kind of working through getting to, 10 million plus ARR, I was like, okay, what am I doing here? We are building intelligent systems to make cigars not dry up in a humidor. We are building, intelligent systems to make sure that the golf course gets, stays green, during the hottest months of the summer, but uses, water efficiently. And I was kind of feeling like there's probably something more. This is always
Mm.
also at a point where we were trying to show we had little kids at the time, kind of like, hey, here's how you get involved in community, and like, you walk past a piece of garbage, you don't just step over it, you pick it up and you throw it in the trash, all those kinds of things. So it kind of came to a bit of a conclusion that moving into a space where I could kind of kind of connect interests and sort of values with my work became really interesting to me. And then as I was looking around, I had my father passed away unexpectedly, so that was really sad. But what it kind of made me realize is, life's short. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I co-founded this, SaaS startup. It like seems to be getting on its own feet. So I ended up getting connected with the founder of Sama, Lila, and I was like, okay, wow, what an interesting concept. There's this belief that talent is distributed equally, but opportunity is not. And
Sure.
that resonated with me greatly. My husband, my partner, he grew up in the projects, first person, in his family to go to college. Like we child of immigrants. Like we really kind of found our way into, I wouldn't say overwhelming success, otherwise I'd probably be retired. But certainly we felt really fortunate, and we're like, hey, work has been incredible. Well, it is a combination of a lot of hard work, but it's also access. So this idea that providing access and opportunity is really what is behind Sama. Sama means equal in Sanskrit. So the way that I look at it is, all these super talented people in, underserved areas, they just lack access, right? So, we don't make up talent and brilliance, right? You just got to open the door for somebody to be able to walk through. So it resonated with me a lot, that financial independence and business can be a force for social good. In other words, instead of worried quite so much about donations, if you can create financial independence and
Yep.
technology ecosystems, people can create their own financial independence and kind of break the poverty cycle. So long-winded way to say, I thought it was just a really brilliant but straightforward way to think about connecting people with work. So I thought that was fantastic. As I started to look into it, I was like, okay, wait a second. I've got a background in technology. I've got a background in services. Like I work with enterprises. Wow. And this business can really hope leverage kind of human and human judgment to improve data. So I thought, wow, what a great way to do this while creating meaningful living wage jobs, parental benefits, medical safety nets, basically to have people not only take on employment, but the idea was jobs beget jobs. So
Yep.
if you have no access and you don't have a CV or a resume, but then you start to work, your ability to get hired and kind of permanently move out of the poverty cycle is much greater. So I love the concept. So long story, that's what interested me in it so much. But as I dug into the company, the core focus was really about how do we leverage all this great human judgment to make data better. And dirty data is like a massive problem. So immediately I started focusing on leveraging all of this great talent, and we built a technology system to be able to capture human insight for training data. So
Okay.
all AI, right? All AI,
All
LLMs,
has to be
frontier
tagged and
models,
trained.
all has to be tagged and trained, right? So, uh, AI is like, they're like humans, right? Data is like experience, right?
Yeah.
So the more data that is ingested, the better and more accurate models can be. So that's really how I got into this. And I thought this combination of, leveraging a technology platform, thinking about where human judgment is necessary to really help improve and train AI, was really fascinating. So
Yeah.
super long-winded
And
answer, but that's how I got
for
here.
for sorry, Ian, just really quickly for the audience, what do you mean by dirty data? Like what does that look like to you?
So dirty data can take like a ton of different, forms. So imagine this: you're trying to buy something on like eBay or a marketplace, right? There are a whole bunch of sellers. They have data. You're looking for something gray, GRAY, but like half of the product SKUs and items on there are spelled GREY, right? So it's a kind of an example of dirty data, right? Things don't match. Maybe they're missing attribution. You're not able to search for something. That's an example of needing to kind of clean up and enrich data so that it is searchable and trainable. Um, yeah, or it could be missing. I mean, basically by definition, we structure unstructured data. So imagine an autonomous vehicle. How you train an autonomous vehicle to recognize different cars, a Vespa. Maybe it's the first time, the car is driven, there's no data for mopeds. What about vulnerable road users? So people on the side of the road. What if it's a small person, a big person, a person of color? Like how do you recognize all that? So how much data you ingest, the quality of that data, and how it gets properly attributed is really critical to making models function.
And so, it's really interesting. I think I maybe late in my career was first exposed to the notion of data labeling actually through vehicle vision, right? In kind of the early 20 teens. And at the time, what I learned was that it was an extraordinarily human intensive process, right? Literally flash image up in front of person, right? You may or may not have attempted to automatically label some things and be like, okay, this
Oh,
is a
right, like the
dog, this is a
captchas
cat,
and stuff like that. Yeah,
and then
yeah,
details.
yeah.
So, and it was a, it was and is a quote unquote expensive human process, but to your point, necessary. So tell me, like, how does Sama help people that want to implement fine-tuned models? What do you actually do? And then we're going to connect that right back to your story around feeding entrepreneurial ecosystems.
Yeah, absolutely. So, at the end of the day, all AI models need to be trained on data. Sometimes companies use synthetic data, right? There are all different methods in which you can train. Uh, but the real what Sama does is we do a couple of things. One is we can do straight up data annotation. So in that example of complex edge cases, there's a lot models have advanced dramatically, but edge cases are really prominent. So I'll use a simple example. Back when Teslas, when the autopilot was first being released, they worked super well on Highway 101. Well,
Mm-hmm.
sure, because that's where all the road, data was, right? It was driving up and down the California coast and through the highways. But try to take that same vehicle and have it work in a 9-lane roundabout in China, right?
Yeah.
Not going to work so well, right? So
Yeah.
so you have to be able to capture and annotate those edge cases in new scenarios that the model doesn't recognize, right? So it knows how to learn from that. In that case, the 9-lane roundabout. We also use something called data validation. So models have gotten a lot smarter. So this is really about, hey, this model has anticipated or has identified what the objects or what the classifications are, but are they correct? Right. So then the human then goes and kind of does an audit, if you will, and provides oversight. And then, of course, the same thing can happen for agentic AI and LLMs. So how do you evaluate that the model's responses, like the prompt and response pairs and things like that, are actually accurate for context, tone, and sentiment? So that's
Mm.
effectively what we do. We can process large volumes of data through our platform. And something that I think is important to note, you touched on this, Ian, is that like gone are the days of, is there a dog or cat in this
Right.
image, right? I mean, things have advanced so much further. So a lot of times, for basic applications, you can leverage, models, right? You can leverage models. You can, but the more complex, the more sort of safety or outcome based, right? Or customer experience based, then yes, you want to make sure that you not only have captured all of the appropriate data and edge cases, but likely have a human in the loop effectively to validate that the model is actually giving the right answer.
And how do you connect this work to the sort of the social responsibility piece of your mission that you talked about? Like, from the very beginning, you have talent distributed globally, access can be and resources can be hyper local. How does the work of Sama create more opportunity in the world, not just for your customers?
So we have an impact sourcing model, which means that you don't have to have a specific set of experience. You can qualify to test out your skills, basically, based off of both household income. We focus on gender diversity, right? So we make sure we have at least 50% women in our workforce. And we pay living wages. That's really the key. So living wages are not minimum wages. They're what does it take to support somebody in a with a rent, healthy foods, 10% savings, etc. And the key is that this is an employment model that includes benefits. So that means
Mm.
maternity leave, paternity leave, mental health, vision, dental, pension plans. And the reason for creating that safety net and the big distinction is that we're hiring people in, we can train them and we can incentivize people on quality because they get a salary.
Yeah.
In the crowd model, right, and crowdsourcing model, you only get paid if you complete the task, quote unquote, correctly. And so
Right.
what happens quite a bit is number one, these are contractors, not employees, so they aren't able to get training. So the description of a task you get within one screen, right? And okay, this is how I need to get the answer.
Yeah.
And
No
there's something
context.
exactly there's something called crowd bias, and I've seen this happen before, where you can get paid, whatever, X amount per task if you are a botany specialist. And so you answer a bunch of questions the system doesn't really know whether you're a botany specialist or a botanist or not, and what your qualifications are, and just keep clicking on the answer until you get it right. Right. So that can be a little bit of a challenge. One of the models that is different for us is that we can train, we can employ, and what happens is that because we're able to train, we're able to really focus on the right taxonomies and the right quality evaluation methods that our clients want. We have the same people who are looking at the data on a regular basis. So when something changes or looks different, we can catch those edge cases. So we think there's a lot of value towards being able to have a trained and retained workforce.
Well, it's amazing because there are implications as well beyond the value to your clients of having a trained and retained workforce. And so do you have any stories, anecdotal or data as a data person on sort of what the second order impacts of your trained workforce might be?
Yeah, well, I mean, absolutely. Like, imagine like search relevance or a product catalog as an example. There are some of these large, retailers and companies out there that have super complex taxonomies. Like, you may not realize it, but there's like 20 different ways you can search for granola bar, right? Is
Sure.
it breakfast? Is it a snack? Is it organic? Is it, healthy? Is it related to outdoors and camping? Right. So some of these taxonomies can be actually quite complex, and so they are specific to that company. So that trained, resource that understands the company's business rules can be incredibly valuable to getting the quality right and being able to validate the data very quickly.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so we started before recording with interest in AI writ large and the impact on society, the impact on all of us, and there's ethics and moral and political stuff. There's all kinds of fun stuff around this. And, fundamentally, you are enablers of, effective quality AI at scale, right? That is something that you enable. So lots of people out there have opinions on AI. Oh, it's evil. Oh, it's amazing. Oh, it's going to put us all out of jobs. The data centers are taking water. Oh, it's going to, give a new lease on life for the creatives in us. Whatever it is. What's going on with AI?
What is going on with AI? Well, yeah, I mean, it's an incredible, and I'm sure you see this every day too. Like, it's incredible productivity booster. I mean, I'm leveraging it myself on a regular basis to help, distill information, to aggregate data. But that's just on a personal basis. The key is how can you get the AI model to perform effectively and accurately, and how can you really do that at scale? So, it's kind of interesting is that I'll maybe use an analogy, right? Um, I was reading something actually the other day. People don't really know how to read maps anymore. They are
Right.
really not very good at navigating,
Yeah.
understanding milestones, describing how to get to places. Well, that's, all of our like Google Maps and GPS systems, right? I mean, I don't know if you've ever been where like the satellite isn't working well and you're like driving yourself in a circle for a while when you actually, if you just would look up,
You ever been
you'd be
you
like,
ever been underground? It's called what, Lower Thacker or something in Chicago. Like, it's famous for this. Like, GPS
and you're
doesn't
just like
work.
spinning around and you're like,
Yeah.
wow, why did that take 28 minutes to get there when it's actually just down the streets? Because your brain's on like autopilot, like just trusting that the
Yeah.
AI is working, right? And I think
Yeah.
the what I find what's interesting about what's going on with AI is that yeah, there's all these incredible, like amazing advancements, but what is really the key to deploying AI successfully is going to be is, well, first of all, do you know what you want it to do? And can you articulate that? Do you know what good looks like? And then once you can describe what good looks like, how are you going to find ways to validate that it actually works? So it's kind of, I use that example of the sort of blind, usage of GPS is because I have had it before, I will admit. It's kind of autopilot, like following the GPS. You've lived in that city a million years and you're like, oh wow, it's just taking me down the wrong route because it got confused. And you just added 30 minutes to your trip. Well, I think that's really the interesting aspect of this. If you put a question into Chat GPT or Gemini, are you just taking are you assuming that the answer is correct? Right? Like, oh, I'm
Yeah.
gonna take it for what it's worth. And so I think that's gonna be really the challenge is as we adopt AI and as we adopt and build AI, can you articulate what you want what do you want the AI to do, and can you articulate what good looks like?
Okay, so articulation is key, but then there comes that educational component. Like, for example, like my parents didn't know for the longest time what catfishing was, like with the internet, right? But that was something that like we grew up just automatically knowing, like if someone random messaged you on Facebook and they claim to be a famous person, it's really probably not that person, right? So I think, so we're talking about almost like a standardized educational component around how to use AI, how to engage with it ethically. So then this also leads me to another question, which is then, much like the internet, do we, I say like, do we as a group here, but do we believe in democratized access to AI as something that's almost going to end up being a basic human right, the way many people believe that the internet should be? And if we believe that, what do we see the effect on society being in terms of our ability to continue to think autonomously and do things for ourselves?
That is a heavy that is a heavy question, which I really really appreciate. That's good. That's really deep. It's like, oh my gosh. Well, it's so interesting, right? And all of these different, I see this with like policy. Every country is building their own AI policies and their own AI standards. Um, and it's pretty interesting because the companies that are building the biggest models in the world are all based in North America, right?
Yeah.
And so what's kind of interesting about this is that, these LLMs are the building blocks, right? That consumers use and that many other companies are building their
Yep.
AI on. And these LLMs, they've been trained on all publicly available data primarily, right? The internet.
Primarily.
Does anybody believe the internet is not biased? And then the internet is 100% truthful, right? So
Right.
what's really when you say
Wait,
democratize,
we all believe everything that's been written. What are you talking about?
yeah, exactly. So I think what's kind of fascinating about what you just said, Lane, is like democratize. Well, gosh, like how do we do that, right? Some, I think, countries are trying to establish that through policy, like the EU AI Responsibility Act, saying, hey, if there's AI that's being built in Europe, it's got to have come, with data that it's been built off of data that is traceable and that they've got the right to use. That there are model evaluation standards, that there are things such as high risk systems. So I think there are some protections in different countries that are trying to be leveraged to at least sort of, if not democratize, like make safe, if you will, or make responsible. But I think the inherent challenge of that is that all of the core model builders are, they're building their models off of this publicly available data. And so even if you have all these different approaches to sort of either make it safe or provide access, they're being built by a handful of companies around the world. Okay? And some of them are doing a really great job. But we did one thing as an example. So we have a lot of our workforce that's based in East Africa. And, everybody, it's interesting. I think on a per sort of capita basis, I believe it's India and Kenya that actually have higher uses of LLMs than even the US. The US may have the highest number of paid subscriptions, but like a lot of these emerging countries are using it greatly. So we did a research project where we took Swahili, that's the language, words, and put them with English into ChatGPT. And do you think it could find anything? Well, no, it couldn't. Like, not even close. So that's kind of the example of, you can take this base AI technology, but if it hasn't been contextualized, right, it's not going to work effectively. So how is that democratized?
Well, and actually, that is super interesting. I want to come back in a second to the tension between safety and democratization, and that is some rich fodder. But to your point, this language translation, I think, is something we don't often think about. Like, because we can go to any LLM, we can go to Google Translate as a different model system, and we can say, hey, like, take this sentence and make it French, or take this sentence and make it Tagalog, or vice versa. But that is very different than training data sourced from French or from Swahili.
Hmm.
And I wonder if you can maybe help us unpack that a little bit, understand why it is so meaningful to ask the question, hey, has the model been trained on and have the context of all of the publicly available Swahili data, for instance?
Yeah, well, I mean, in that case, especially with some of these, I don't know if popular is the right word, but maybe less captured languages, is that one, you're training off of a limited data set. So how much will these model know based off of
Mhm.
what is available on the internet? So a lot of there's some pretty interesting groups out there. Like we've worked with this group that's trying to improve Southeast Asian languages, or help these large frontier model builders improve their understanding of Malay, Lao, and like you name it. And so what they're doing is they're encouraging people to get data sets out there so that these models can be trained. So that's one way to do it, is increase the data sets. The other is have local people help do that training. So as an example, what we did in our study is we said, create your own prompts, right? So we had to define what the prompts were to really be able to help do the evaluation of the model itself. So having that local context is really key, because
Yeah.
you can find a
Mhm.
translation dictionary that's online, but that's not going to give you any level of context. And language is really, really interesting because language changes, right? There are new
Yes.
catfish wasn't a word, whatever, 40 years ago, right?
Mhm.
So, and I mean, like, I've got teenagers, so I mean, every day I'm kind of like, what did you say?
I
What you're
mean,
talking
heck,
about?
I've got young children that have new words all the time. But it's interesting because so I had a really interesting moment. I want to say it wasn't that long ago, maybe 18 months, maybe 24 months ago, which is an eternity, I guess. But I had a really interesting moment where I was talking with a native Japanese language speaker about the state of the art LLMs and foundation models of the time, right? And so it was only 2 years ago or whatever it was, but it was still much earlier than today. But what she told me was that even speaking in Japanese, these models spoke like they were speaking English. And,
Mhm.
it's something really interesting because if you think about the difference in the way communication and thought happens between a extraordinarily extreme high context place like Japan, or the polar opposite, low context direct place like the US, you're not just speaking differently, you're actually conveying very different representation of intelligence and thought. And anyway, I mean, that really jumped out at me. And I think, Wendy, it kind of builds on what you're saying. Like, you know, the fact that the model could theoretically communicate perfectly in Japanese did not mean that it represented the sort of the thought patterns, the practice, and the language of Japanese, and it felt inherently foreign to her. And I wonder how many of us, you know, in North America, where, despite incredible work coming out of China, yes, the biggest and most used foundation models are all created, don't even realize how much is missing from those models.
Yeah, I mean, completely. That one, research study on Swahili was really interesting because it wasn't even like complicated things. It was like, how is your day? Where's the restaurant? Top five common most foods, and it was really interesting to see that. Yeah, it's really difficult to make a one size fits all. Um,
So who tackles this? Who actually cares about tackling this? Like, this is always the problem, is like, where's the resources, the money, the impetus, the customer demand? Like, who yeah, who tackles this?
yeah, it's it's really interesting given that it's all private companies, right, that are building these models, and where are people paying for them? Who's your audience and the subscriptions? And so yeah, it's not super. Researchers I think are trying to do the right things, but at the end of the day, I think it's fairly complex, which is where some of this policy and regulations could come into play, because um, how else do you sort of have risk factors, right? Because if the only people who are kind of, I won't say funding, but like the focus is going to be on getting additional subscribers and applications, well, you're going to focus there. So how well is that going to fit in other applications? And these LLMs, these frontier models, are so vast and expensive. What'll happen, I mean, this is my belief, is that they'll continue to consolidate. It's kind of like cloud computing. You don't have 50 large cloud computing companies. You basically have three, right? And that's probably what'll happen in this space. Is it costs so much money and so much energy, and to get these models to that level, you won't. They're only like what, 40 or so in the world. And that number is going to continue to drop. So
Yeah.
it is interesting and is challenging. And will we start to see some more kind of country specific models, right? Like I'm sure like Mistral is French out of France, and then you've
Yep.
got DeepMind out of China, and then I don't know, it's a really interesting space. But is it going to be inclusive? And maybe I'll describe it. Yeah, not so sure about that.
I know Ian's got another question here, but I just want to follow up on something that you kind of touched on, and that's the tension between government regulation and corporations that are trying to develop something that's, for profit and for a specific customer demand. And that tension is the fact that this technology evolves a lot faster than regulation can put things through. And so what are your thoughts on, like, do you foresee the integrity of, and this is not to be negative, but the integrity of some of these LLMs and some of this, software not diminishing, but finding workarounds quicker than regulation can keep up with them? Or like, what does that look like to you?
Yeah, or kind of lack of policy and regulation, right? So
And the lack
so
thereof as well, right? Like, well, if we
exactly.
can't keep up, then why try? I don't know if there's.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting, right? Because I mean, certainly in the U.S., like under kind of current administration, et cetera, like even the word responsible has kind of been pulled out of most of the language. There's not really a policy, and there's
Mm,
definitely not regulation. What's interesting though is that there are different states doing things, like Colorado as well as California. Um, which took kind of a carrot approach instead of a stick approach. So there's this pretty interesting legislation that happened in California where instead of saying like, hey, we're going to regulate you like Europe, because I mean, there are arguments, absolutely for, well, I mean, since when does the government know more about technology, right? So there is
Yeah.
challenge, right, around regulation
It's
as
a
a
pretty real
whole.
argument.
It's a very real argument. So we could talk about the European approach in a moment and why I think kind of why they did it and what the impacts are there. But this California legislation, which is really interesting, basically says, "Hey, we want people to build AI responsibly." So responsible is different than ethical. It includes ethical, but it's about how do you build trustworthy AI. So Lane, you mentioned trust. Well, everybody should care about trust, right? And private companies should care about trust when they're building their models, because trust means that customers will adopt their software because they'll use it. They believe in it. They
yeah.
think there's going to be a good outcome and value out of the software. So trust is really about customer adoption at the end of the day. To build trust, responsible AI frameworks are around, where'd you get the data? Did you get it lawfully, right? As opposed to, uncopyrighted, etc. Do you have an auditable trail of it? So how did you train your model to a certain extent? And did you
Mm.
have a method of evaluation? So do you know what good looks like, right? It's kind of like the measure twice, cut once. It's if you can't articulate what you want the AI to do, how do you know it's performing well or not well?
Mm-hmm.
How do you red team? How do you ensure that it's operating within policy, right? And then you have an ongoing way to do that evaluation. So those practices are really important. And what this legislation is, it said, hey, for developers who kind of get themselves certified in responsible AI practices, and under that framework, you will get indemnity. So if something bad happens with your software, you'll be protected. And so I thought that was a really interesting way. And then,
Mm.
companies can sort of sign up to be certified that they've been built responsibly, which I thought was a pretty clever, right? So it's not necessarily regulating you, but it's incentivizing companies to take on best practices. In
Yeah.
Europe,
And
those same pillars exist too, but it's actually regulated. And I think their approach is more, hey, we like Rotten Tomatoes, right? The movie rating system. It's
mhm,
like
Yeah.
certified fresh. So like, hey, if you pass our, you developed it in the EU and you developed it under this framework, it's like a certified fresh kind of accreditation. Where I think part of the view is that then Europeans, because data privacy is like a really big deal, and there's GDPR and all that kind of stuff, um, can feel better about using this. But then the other component of it is around high risk systems. So for example, like if you're doing something like financial lending, right? That's pretty challenging if you have not trained the data properly. Like I'm sure this is obviously old, but the old horror story of the Amazon recruitment engine, right?
mhm,
So they built a AI model that was recruiting for software engineers. They inferred based off of all of the candidates that women aren't qualified because they only represented like 5% of the population. So that's
mhm.
that's a training data, example where um what level of, in higher risk systems like lending, like um you know lending, insurance, things of that nature, would you want people to get excluded or be treated unfairly because the model wasn't trained properly? So I
Yeah.
went like super wide there, but
But it's
that's it.
important, right? Because like, I mean, look, this is the conversation, not just in Silicon Valley and not just in technology ecosystems globally, but in business globally, right? And like, yeah, we're touching on classic things like, governance around free market incentives versus sort of prescribed regulation. And, we could wax eloquent on strong opinions there. But it is important because AI touches all of this. So I've got kind of this might be a bit of a tough question. Feel free to deflect or adapt or just dive right in. Um, do you get pulled into these conversations with your clients, who are not just sort of thinking about, okay, like how do I make sure that I can run my business in France as well as in Canada, as well as in Australia, as well as in Argentina and wherever, but clients that are thinking about um, what position do I want to stake out? What claim do I want to make? What position do I want to stake out for our company in terms of how AI should and could be used? Do you get involved in that, or is that sort of outside of the core of what you do?
So when we get involved, I mean, usually we get involved after the companies have said, "Hey, we're going to build some enterprise AI application."
Yeah.
So we're not usually involved in the, "Hey, how could AI make a difference in our product?" They're kind of already there saying, "Hey, I want to build, an anti, collision feature in my car. I want to, have this like amazing recommendation engine in my e-commerce platform so that I can provide substitutes, if we're out of stock of XYZ." So they've already kind of said, hey, we think that there's a really good, all right, there is a model that can add value to our product. Where we start to get engaged and what we see a lot is really around quality and accuracy. So how do we know
Mm,
when the model is working properly? And what's interesting is that, for all the different enterprises we work with, they are leveraging AI in a way that is going to either be safety related, it's going to generate more revenue, it's going to generate outcomes, it could generate a really amazing customer experience or terrible customer experience. So for example, like when you're using like a virtual fitting room or like filters and stuff, right? It wouldn't be a very cool experience if your bunny ears were out floating, off on the side and not on top of your head, right? So
yep.
there's usually some sort of a desire to have a high kind of quality threshold. But what we see that's really interesting is that to be able to do it and do it at scale, you have to have an ROI, if you will. Like, what is the cost of failure? And is that worth the investment in basically training your model to the level of kind of accuracy and completeness? I know it's kind of
Mm.
getting a little bit into sort of the nerdy part of things,
Yeah.
but that's really what we see being a pretty interesting question is, well, how much is good enough?
Yeah.
It's like, well, how bad is it if it fails? Is it going to cost you, money? Are you going to have lower revenues? is it a safety application? If it's a safety application, people care deeply.
What's the answer like that you're getting from clients? And I realize it ranges, but like, let me just, if I frame this right, there's often a tension between, innovation to drive an outcome that you're going for and risk management, right? There's a natural tension there. Where are your clients landing on this? Are they trying to design for the 5 nines edge cases, or are they trying to step back and say, YOLO, let's learn, let's see, let's throw something out there?
Uh, I would say we tend to work with larger enterprises, so they're pretty well thought out, right?
Yeah.
So, they are I mean, I give some pretty obvious examples like self-driving cars. They're going to be thinking about it pretty deeply.
Yes.
Right. Surgical robots. Yeah, they're going to be thinking pretty deeply about what this looks like because of the implications at play. But we see very few enterprises who are willing to large enterprises who are willing to sort of risk their reputation by not having a thoughtful approach. So it's interesting. I think there's something that's pretty admirable that Waymo has done, right? So one of the things they've done is they publish these safety reports, like 100,000 miles driven autonomously.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I think it's a very smart thing to do because basically what they're showcasing is, not only does this AI work, but look at this compared to our, sort of accidents per, property damage, accidents, etc., and compared to human drivers. So I think one of the things that's interesting is in that case, there's sort of a recognition that the expectation of that vehicle is actually probably higher than a human driver.
Yeah.
Right?
It's probably 1,000x higher than a human driver in terms of
Would
the
you
hurdle
walk
you have
into
to
the car
pass.
if you're like, this is like, my crazy neighbor Joe's driving habits? Like you wouldn't do that, right? You definitely have a higher expectation. So I think at the enterprise level, some of these companies are really thinking thoughtfully and saying, hey, we know that the expectation is higher. So if you have a chatbot experience, for example, and the chatbot says something incorrect with the threshold for tolerance and the customer experience on that, it's trust. Lane, I mean, I keep going back to you said trust. You're not going to trust that AI. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there may be a push to say, hey, how do we, reduce costs? How can we deliver this AI more efficiently? The companies that are serious about this as a differentiator are looking at it pretty hard and saying, you know what, we recognize there's a cost to making this product effective. If the product is not effective, we're going to lose trust.
Yeah.
We're not going to get.
I think
I love to. I love to hear that, and it's reassuring, right? Because I think a lot of people are just looking at industry writ large in any sector and saying, "Oh, people are forging ahead with new technologies, new ideas," and so it's reassuring to hear that. But I will say, I have a certain admiration for companies that take calculated risks with AI. And let's be very clear, like your risk threshold is wildly different in an autonomous aircraft versus, a chatbot. But I've talked about it on the show before, but there's this wonderful example from Air Canada from what actually might be 18 plus months ago, 2 years ago now, right? Where, Air Canada, they threw out a LLM backed chatbot. It promised a fare that was incorrect to a customer. Air Canada refused to honor it, and then they got slapped in the courts for it. I'm summarizing. This is effectively what happened, right? And I think rightly so, because an agent of the company had promised a fare, and they didn't honor it. There's a lot of, when you see examples like that, or you see the MIT headline from last fall that said like 90+% of Gen AI projects are failing. There's a rush to critique. But I will say I have a certain admiration for the calculated risk takers that are like, actually, we're going to design this to the quality threshold we think we need, and then throw it out there and then learn. And I wonder if you're seeing in the industry, like, I'm just wondering if you're seeing any changes perhaps in the industry in how companies are approaching risk thresholds, or is it are they just saying, hey, like, we have to bring AI in, we know we do, or we're not going to be competitive? What's going on there?
Well, I think it's like twofold. So when I mentioned the sort of cost of failure, the cost of quality, that is a sort of a bit of a calculated risk, right? So how you want. I'll use a benign example. You're an e-commerce platform. Lots of these now e-commerce platforms for foods will say, oh, if you bought that, French bread, then here's some butter, right? Like they do recommendations and things like that. Is
Mm-hmm.
it a just terrible thing if it says, instead of butter, like Alfredo sauce? It's
Right.
probably like, is it so? Will you go through and will you spend X amount of money? Like so there are some calculated decisions that say, what is the sort of cost of failure and the ROI? And in that case, it would be, hey, when you can do pairings, you increase your cart size. So there's revenue there. Now, if you don't get it right every time, that's probably okay, right? And so there are going to be, I think, we see those kinds of decisions, being made. I think where things tend to go quite, well, let's say quite wrong or can be challenges when uh, when the definition of quality or what, like what I mentioned before, what good looks like isn't well defined, because then
Yeah.
you're really lost, right? Like how do
Yeah.
you know if it's working well or not working well? Can you even identify what those quality thresholds are if you can't articulate what you want it to do? And so that's the notion of edge cases and why kind of quality calibration. And you don't just sort of set it and forget it. You can't. Data evolves, and like, which developer in their life ever knew every single outcome that they wanted? They
Yeah.
didn't. That's why
Never.
you do it iteratively, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we just keep coming back to, like, in all things, right? Like, measure
Mm-hmm.
thrice, cut once, do your, I love it.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, we've talked about trust in a couple different capacities. So trust in terms of, say, for example, like your chatbot example, and then we've talked about trust with AI in things like insurance or finances. So what about the trust that you can't see? So, for example, even just like we talked about very early in the conversation, a conversation with ChatGPT, and you ask it a question and it gives you an answer. What is your advice to people in general with regard to engaging things and being able to measure whether or not something is trustworthy?
Mm, very good. Very good question. I think I'd probably start with, um, this gonna sound really basic. Critical thinking. Before you just start jumping into it, and like, oh, okay, I'm gonna trust what that, what the data says, and I'm gonna blindly, kind of operate on, is just take a step back, look at the answer. Does that look right? Each what we find is that each, if you ask a certain models to do a calculation, like I always double check the calculation, right? Like I
Hmm.
was like,
Yeah.
hey, did this actually work? Was this correct? I've seen things that are wildly off about companies' calculations. So do a sanity check. Don't just sort of read it and trust it blindly. I
Hmm.
think the second thing is certainly is that the benchmarks are helpful sometimes, right? So different models are good at different things. Um,
Yeah.
we all kind of have our certainly our favorites. I think Anthropic, when it comes to writing and content creation, is pretty solid, right?
Hmm.
Is it the best, engineer, software code assistant? Well, I think that there are probably some others like Chris that might be a little bit. So, there's different. I think benchmarks can be very helpful, but it absolutely starts with, did you set your prompt correctly? What is the answer you are expecting? And take a moment to think about it before you just take it for what it's worth. I tell my kids the same thing, but yeah, you got to actually think about it critically.
Hmm.
Model's not good at doing everything.
I mean, friend of the podcast, Vivienne Ming, came on recently. She's got a book on this topic. We'll put in the show notes. But she kind of made a point really similar to what you basically said. But if I am to paraphrase, it is that if you accept the model's answer or the tech's answer every time, you become dumber as a person. And you're going to get things wrong. If you accept it is the beginning of a back and forth, and you ask the question, is this correct? Both you and your tech are going to get smarter every time. If you accept the GPS navigation into the Thames, you're going to drive into the Thames. If you ask, is this the right route? You're going to reinforce, decision making and knowledge. I think that's actually kind of important, because I think a lot of us sometimes default to, oh man, tech, it gives me an answer, let's just accept it. And that way actually lies quite a lot of danger, right? Bad training data leads to bad outcomes. There's other danger as well.
Well, because my argument has always been that goes against human nature. Like human nature, we want profit. We seek the easiest course, right? That's why innovation happened in the first place. The Industrial Revolution, the Agricultural Revolution, all of these things, right? Is we found a way to make things more efficient and easier for ourselves. We can't help it, and
Yeah,
I
we're all
think
working
that,
harder.
and
Yeah.
however, if I personally just kind of believe if we're going to survive the age of AI, we actually have to learn how to inherently go against those instincts and be mindful of all of this moving forward. And I think there has to be an educational component to this in terms of, in schools and things like that, is there has to be a way that you approach all of these systems so that you don't become dumber as a human.
100%. I mean, I don't know if you guys have seen Wall-E. There's some truth to that
Yes.
that movie. Like, there's some truth
Uh-huh.
to that. I don't
Yes.
want to be floating, in the galaxy on these little hovercrafts, right, or around and forget how to walk, right? So,
100.
but it's an incredible movie. But yeah, no, I mean, I think it's true. It's interesting. I was just on a family trip, and we driven out of this like cul-de-sac like the same time 10 times, but we follow the GPS. So like we got, half the time we took the wrong way, right? And it's like, well, wait a second,
Yep.
like we've been here before. We actually know that we need to go right. So like you have to sort of have that question and
Yeah.
sort of trust your instincts. And when it comes to education, I think that's exactly right. There is everything from how do you build AI, right? So the education around responsible AI practices, which aren't, again, they are best practices. It's the measure thrice, cut once. It's have a way to do the evaluation, know where your data is coming from, actually articulate what data, articulate what you want the outcomes to be. Things that all sound very self-evident, but are not a standard, right? So
Yeah.
that is one which is the first place it starts is the developers who are building these AI applications and models. Like, let's communicate and make all of the best practices, including things like red teaming, which is okay, is the model operating within the parameters you want it to, and having
Yeah.
tools. So like I think GitHub and Google, they both have some developer tools out there that allow you to kind of leverage this. So that if you're building it, you can have these different checkpoints, in place, kind of like standards, if you will. And
Yeah.
then for individuals, I mean, absolutely, it's like I hope everybody understands this by now, but my goodness, if you don't have a licensed, software to these, a license to some of these LLMs, you're giving your data away. Do you
Mm-hmm.
want your data to train the model? Are you aware of that? Do you understand the parameters and these sort of disclaimers of how to use this data? So yeah, I agree 100%. I don't, we shouldn't bury our heads in the sand in terms of training about this and informing people how to use the AI for their own benefit,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, completely agreed.
Well, this is incredible, Wendy. We've covered a lot of ground here, actually. But I just want to say thank you for joining us on Innovators Inside. Your business is at a very fascinating place. Like, sort of, I mean, fundamentally, you're sort of sitting between the reality that exists in the world, the real data, and how it's used and ingested effectively into these AI systems all around us. It's got to be wild, some of what you see day to day. And really appreciate you coming here on Innovators Inside to share your stories, your thoughts, etc. For audience members who want to follow what you're doing, your work, where should they find you? You on LinkedIn? Should they head to the company's website? Where should they get in touch?
Company's website, so sama.com or LinkedIn. I'm happy to connect. And yeah, this has been fun. It's not often you can range from policy, AI democratization to Sauvignon Blanc to Wally, all in one conversation. So good stuff. Thank you.
Glad we got
Only
there.
on Innovators Inside.
Only on Innovators Inside. Thanks so much, Wendy. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.